Testing, testing, testing. Can you hear me, everyone? Can you hear me? I've got no camera tonight, which is fine by me. You don't need to see my pretty visage for the intro or the outro. The slides are the important thing, and that's why you're all here. Welcome, everyone. I am, as always, Kyle Cush from the Arrow Lakes Historical Society, and I welcome you to Get Outta Town, a journey beyond the Arrow Lakes. And now you say, beyond the Arrow Lakes? Aren't you the Arrow Lakes Historical Society? What do you mean the journey beyond the Arrow Lakes? Well, I'll tell you how this show came about. We're getting close to the end of the slideshow season here, and I've already got the final show for next month already made. Ichiroshi no Movie Night, Part 2, by the way. And so I was looking for a topic for this show. Now, over the past few months, we've already seen thousands of photos on our YouTube slideshows. And so, I want to make sure I'm not repeating any material. And then I realized, there's a lot of material that doesn't usually get seen in these slideshows because they're taken outside of the Arrow Lakes, taken outside of the Upper Lardeau. But there's still really interesting imagery, whether they're in people's personal collections or professional collections that sort of get lumped in with accessions and what have you. And I figured this would be a good time to showcase these wonderful items in our collection. And so we give you Get Outta Town, where I guarantee not one single photo tonight is actually taken within the Arrow Lakes or Upper Lardeau region. Not even the Upper Slocan. But we're going to go all around the West Kootenay, East Kootenay, Southern BC, Alberta, even into Ontario, even up north, and perhaps even abroad. Yes, Donald, I mentioned at the beginning that the camera is not installing here. So you won't get to see me tonight, you'll just get to hear my dulcet tones. So, without any further ado, we've got about 125 delectable images to devour tonight. So, let's get started here. And we'll start off in the Kootenays. This is the SS City of Ainsworth sailing on the Kootenay River. 1897. This comes from the Ed Vipond collection. And Ed Vipond, who is a Lardeau native, lived in Trout Lake and lived in the Cusp, and worked for the CPR for his adult working life. From the time he was a teenager, wound up retiring to Vancouver, where he became one of perhaps the leading historian on interior sternwheelers and paddle wheelers, and so he has this amazing collection that of paddle boats from all around the province. Longtime volunteer with the Vancouver Maritime Museum, and so we're fortunate that we because of his connection to the Cusp, we have a lot of these photos that we can share with you. And the City of Ainsworth, you might recognize its name. That's the sternwheeler that's actually at the bottom of Kootenay Lake. I think it sunk in 1913 or so. But here it is in action on the Kootenay River. And what's really cool is that you also see a indigenous teepee in the background. That's really cool. I love that. The interaction. Here's another one from the Ed Vipond collection. This is the SS Kokanee, also on Kootenay Lake. And I love the the way that this photo has been cut inside the photo album. This is a CPR-owned houseboat on the waterfront at Nelson on the West Arm. It says early 20th century, but I could easily be convinced that this is the 1890s as well. To think that this is the Nelson shipyard. This is right beside the airport. This is right next to where the Prestige Hotel is tonight. Or today. Speaking of the Nelson waterfront, there's the SS Spokane at high water, June 1894, and as you can see, that was a flood year. A pretty substantial flood year, as you can tell by the boathouses, some of which are pretty much completely submerged underneath the waters of the West Arm. Fast forward in time, 69 years. Here's a massive Sikorsky helicopter taking off from the waterfront at Nelson. It looks a lot more industrial than it does today. Well, again, all of those waterfronts, and it really gives you a feel for the size of a Sikorsky helicopter. This helicopter did not fare as well. This and the last one both come from Hufty Hewitt's awesome collection of slides. Now, this crash looks pretty brutal, but fortunately, both pilot and passenger only got out with minor injuries. This is extremely close to where the Prestige is now. You can actually see the Ellison building, the Ellison Market building, way at the back, at right there, behind the train. Speaking of famous collectors and archivists, Bob Turner, former head archivist at the Royal BC Museum, his grandparents and parents came from Nakusp. Burton originally, then Nakusp. And so we were very, very lucky to receive a number of negatives from the Turner family. And after they left the cusp, they went to Nelson in the late 30s. And so naturally a lot of Nelson content shows up in these negatives. And this is a gorgeous shot of downtown Nelson from Gyro Park. Into the 30s, you can see Vernon Street with the median running through it, and then Baker Street's over at left. And of course, the great thing about Nelson is almost all of those buildings are still there and still looking good. Another family connection. Edward Riley Redpath is the great-grandfather of our president. Of our society's president, and so the Taylor family is very graciously allowed us to share some of these Redpath photos. And you can actually find them through the link on our website. Just follow through to the our page on the BC Regional Digitized History website, hosted by UBC Okanagan. And on Arca BC, and you can actually browse through entire photo albums from Edward Redpath, who was a station agent for the CPR and worked in many different places around Western Canada. And this is a great shot of St. Saviour's Anglican Church in a state of disrepair in Nelson. It's actually a pro-cathedral, I believe. It's the former seat of the Diocese of Kootenai, or Archdiocese of Nelson. One of the two. I'm getting my churches mixed up. Another Hufty Hewitt shot. This is a great shot of the Big Orange Bridge before it was orange. Yes, for the first few years of its existence, it was the color of the cold metal it was fashioned from before they painted it orange. Its official name is simply the Nelson Bridge, but a great shot of the Fairview district of Nelson. Looking the other way, this is an Ellis Anderson photo. This is Nelson as seen from Rosemont, which is the westernmost neighborhood of Nelson, and kind of often gets forgotten about because it's on the other side of Highway 6, and so it's a bit cut off from the rest of the city. But it shows you how the city of Nelson just sprawls up the side of Morning Mountain. Really cool shot, and it looks so agrarian out in front, even though it's right by the city. The Tagum Bridge that you drive across now when you're heading into Nelson is not the original Tagum Bridge. That's the original Tagum Bridge. And you can actually still see the foundations of the bridge. And if you're on the south side, the Granite Road side, you can actually still drive up to right where the bridge used to be. The modern bridge is a bit past this. That was built in '64, I believe. If Greg Nestoroff were here, he could tell me. Back to some more Charles Turner negatives. This is a great shot of the Upper Bonington Dam and powerhouse. And of course, that powerhouse is still there. You can see it from Highway 3A/6 as you drive by. A great shot. Going into those Hufty Hewitt slides, there are hundreds of photos that Hufty took as he flew all around British Columbia working on various projects. He took dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of shots of all the different dams around BC being constructed in the 60s and 70s. He would have worked on a lot of those projects. It's pretty stunning, the size of these operations. Look at the size of those penstocks. This is at South Slocan, where the Kootenai Canal was being constructed. And way up at the top right is South Slocan Village. That's where the Dam Inn is. Yeah, that's where the Kootenai Canal now rejoins the main Kootenai River channel. Go back in time 30 years, the mid-1940s, and that's when the Brilliant Dam was being built at Brilliant, just north of Castlegar on the Kootenai River. And this is a photo by Charlie Rollins over the cusp. So this is the dam under construction. The Brilliant Suspension Bridge is just off to the right. And then here it is, just a year later, completed. And you can, and I'll go back and forth here, you can see how much the level of the river is affected by the construction of that dam. They don't call it a reservoir, but that is Scatibo Reach of the Kootenai River. It is raised quite a bit. And of course, that dam had even more hydroelectric generators added to it in the early 2000s. My dad worked on that project. Hufty Hewitt also took many photos from firefighting operations across the Kootenays. So lots of great aerial shots of forest fires. Here's an interesting one because it's right at Brilliant, directly opposite the river from downtown Castlegar. This was called the Indian Fire. It was on the south slope of Mount Sentinel. You can see the Brilliant Dam in the background, and again, it gives you an idea of how much if you look closely, you can actually see a little bit of the Kootenai River and how much that water level was raised by the construction of that dam. And then you have the old Waldy Mill at the bottom left. And you'll also notice there is no bridge quite yet. Not that you'd be able to see the bridge, actually, from this location, but there is no bridge yet connecting Castlegar to Raspberry and Robson. Raspberry and Robson would be just below this photo. This is a great shot of the Castlegar Airport in 1960. A bit more humble of airport terminal than the one that's there now. Back then, this was just Castlegar Airport. Now it is West Kootenai Regional Airport. And we go back to the Redpath photo albums here. E.R. Redpath worked a lot in the Boundary region. Station agent at Greenwood. And during his time, he took some great photos of the town sites and the boundary. This is Cascade. If you know where the Christina Lake Golf Course is, that's basically right on top of Cascade City. There's still a couple of blocks of the original town grid there left. But this would be Cascade at around its peak. Right at the turn of the 20th century there. Here's downtown Grand Forks in the teens. A really cool shot, and that would be the Kettle River there in the foreground. And this would be further west down Grand Forks. If you've ever looked at Grand Forks on a map, you'll notice it's kind of spread out. And it almost looks like there's two completely different street grids and then separated by a little dip and a curve. And that's because they were two completely separate towns. One was Grand Forks, one was Columbia. West Grand Forks and East Grand Forks, and eventually the two were merged early on in the 20th century. Greg Nestoroff, again, has a great article on this that you can Google in his place name series. And, but yeah, you'll notice they're a bit offset, the two halves of the city. And and it's also kind of why there's so many wide open spaces in Grand Forks. It never quite filled in all the way. This is downtown Greenwood. And you're looking east, up the road towards the now long-lost town site of Phoenix, which would be about 15 kilometers to the east, way up in those mountains. But normally we think you look down Highway 3 going down the center of downtown Greenwood, but instead you're looking across. Modern Highway 3 would be in the middle of this photo. A really cool perspective of downtown Greenwood, and again, how bustling it was at this point in history. And of course, as we all know, Greenwood, most famous for being the smallest incorporated city in Canada. Here's the railway station at Greenwood, where Ed Redpath worked. And there are his children. And of course, probably a bit more common to be letting children handle rifles back in 1900 than it is in 2022. This is a cool shot. This is a picnic at China Creek, right at the riverbanks of modern-day Janelle, in between Castlegar and Trail. At far left, we see Louise' husband, and the reason we have this photo in our collection is because in 1899, she and her husband would take over the Halcyon Hot Springs Hotel and run it there for a few years. And so a lot of these Trail and Rossland area photos from their personal collection made their way into our collection. Speaking of Trail, here's another E.R. Redpath photo. Here's the Gulch in Trail. And you can really see how the Gulch gets its name. A very, very fantastic shot. The road heading toward Rossland would be at bottom right. And then you come down into the Gulch, and then downtown is further up. There's downtown Trail, as seen at the turn of the century at the Columbia River there. It's hard to... You'd have to be told that this was trail, I think, to sort of be able to pick it out. So many of the buildings are different. Perhaps all the houses on the hillside in the background would be a little bit of a giveaway. East Trail is the other bank of the river, and of course that's where the Columbia River Skywalk would be today, and as well as the Victoria Street Bridge would be sort of in the foreground. It might not even make it on camera, actually. But there's a more familiar view of trail with the giant Cominco smelter, of course, and the bridge across the Columbia River at bottom. And you'll also notice the lack of vegetation on the hillside, thanks to all that wonderful smoke. And as you go through these next few photos, you see as they clean up the smelter, it becomes the environmental standards become more and more enhanced over time. The vegetation starts to return to the hillside. There's a great shot, trail in 1966. So compare bridges. The modern bridge dates to the early 60s, I believe. And there's downtown in the foreground, East Trail in the background, and you can see Kootenai Boundary Hospital in the background. Another great, fantastic Ellis Anderson shot. Here's another perspective. This time looking from East Trail toward downtown. And you can see a little bit of the smoke from the smelter in the background. Also gives you an idea of the different benches that trail sits on. Or wait a minute, I'm looking the wrong direction. This is from downtown, looking east. Because that's Shaver's Bench up there. Yeah. Okay, so we are... Oh. Yeah, we're looking toward East Trail, and then that's the old bridge that is now decommissioned on the right. There we go. And so we're looking way off in the distance, way beyond that smoke would be where Juanita Plaza is now. And also taken from the same set of Ellis Anderson photos, 1966. So this is taken from close to where Juanita Plaza is now. That doesn't get built for a handful of years after this. That's like 74, 75, 76-ish. Trail's way off in the distance at this point. This isn't even inside the city limits at this point. Now this would all be within the city limits of Trail, looking towards Glenmary. You turn around, and you see Montrose. Montrose wouldn't have been very old in this photo. It wasn't developed until the 50s. So, we forget how young that village is sometime. It was developed as a bedroom community for Cominco smelter workers. But it's interesting to think that Juanita Plaza and the Walmart and Canadian Tire, all that, is within the city limits of Trail, but it's actually closer to downtown Montrose than it is to downtown Trail. More Ellis Anderson photos from that part of the world. The Juanita Dam in the summer of 1966. This is on the Ponderay River right before the border with Washington State. Go back into the Depression years, and a lot of people from the Cusp area and the Lardeau area went to work in a couple of the mines that were open at the time in the southern part of the West Kootenay. If there was work, you took it. And one of those mines was the Bayonne mine, northeast of Kootenay Pass. About as remote as you could get in the West Kootenay in the late 1930s, and probably about as remote as you can get in the West Kootenay nowadays. It is not close to anything. Our last slideshow was the Gene Spicer collection, and there are over 1,660 photos in that collection. There are just hundreds, and so many of those photos were taken on hiking trips. We showed some of them in last month's show, but because this is Get Out of Town, and the rule was no Arrow Lakes or Upper Lardeau photos, in this, we are looking at a photo from Kokanee Glacier Provincial Park, and look at this old cabin that Chris Spicer is posing in front of. That cabin probably would have been 60 or 70 years old at this point, and you can see inside it's been completely reclaimed by the vegetation if you peek in through the holes in the wall. Perhaps our biggest out-of-town collection that we have in our holdings is that of Milton Goddard. Milton Goddard was the former regional director for the Kootenays for BC Parks, and so there are hundreds of his photos taken from around British Columbia and even a bit into the prairies as well of different parks. And of course, because they're a coherent collection, and they're on slides, so it doesn't take much room for us to store, we can host that collection. And even though there are, of course, lots of Arrow Lakes photos in that collection, like I said, there's hundreds of photos from all around the province and all around Western Canada. And this is another great West Kootenay shot. Mountain caribou have been in the news around here for a few years now, as we endeavor to preserve the last of the mountain caribou in our region, and now we have our mountain caribou pen behind the cusp. Here is the Selkirk Mountain herd in what is now Stagleap Provincial Park, the Kootenai Pass, in between Salmo and Creston. And this is a herd that is sadly we're certain no longer with us, which is why the efforts are now taking place to preserve what we have left. This is Bugaboo Glacier in Bugaboo Provincial Park, so at the summit of the Purcell Mountains, which separate the West Kootenay from the East Kootenay. Bugaboo Glacier is west of Radium, Hot Springs, Parsons, Spilmachine, that area. And I should point out the cairn hanging on that rock precipice. Speaking of Bugaboo Provincial Park, look at these neat-looking emergency shelters from the mid-1960s. Now they would probably call that glamping and charge you $150 a night to stay in one of them. So many amazing shots. Another shot from that part of the world, the Lake of the Hanging Glacier. That's Commander Mountain, Commander Glacier. Lake of the Hanging Glacier, I think, is in the Purcell Wilderness Conservancy. If it's not in the Bugaboos, then it's the Purcell Wilderness Conservancy. Pretty majestic. This is a great shot. The famous Bluebell Mine in Riandel, yes, Riandel, not Ryandel. It was shuttered in 1972, and immediately, efforts turned to land reclamation and demolishing the old structures. And so even just a year after the mine was closed, it's already looking very abandoned. And this is a great shot of the entrance to the Bluebell Mine just a year later. And I've actually walked on this site, as you'll see. But here's a group of people at the entrance to a former mine shaft, and you can actually see a hole in the rock, right? This is the Cold Fire burning on the mountainside west of Moy Lake in 1958. And you can see this is a pretty substantial fire. One of the cool things about aerial shots of forest fires is that you really get a sense for how much and how quickly a forest fire can destroy. Moving further into the East Kootenay now, Eager Hill is the hill between Cranbrook and Fort Steele, right next to the Crow's Nest Highway. And on top of that hill was a forest fire lookout. This is a view from Eager Lookout looking toward the famous steeples, which are so famous enough that the city of Cranbrook had them in their logo for a while. If they may still even now. Just off in the middle of the photo, you can just eke out the valley of the Kootenay River. But the steeple's a very distinctive formation at the front of the Rocky Mountains. Lots of personal photos in our collection come from out of town. They're photos that show what happens to a family from the Arrow Lakes, either what their life was like before they arrived, or what happened to them after they left. And in this case, this shows us the May family, who lived at West of Mars in the late 1910s and early 1920s. When they left West of Mars, as eventually every family did, they went to Jaffrey in the East Kootenay, in between Fort Steele and Fernie. And a pretty barren shot. There's still stumps on the farmland. But that's a vintage Pioneer swing set. A neat shot. Another Milton Goddard shot. This is as far southeast as you can get in British Columbia and still be within British Columbia. This is what is now the Akamina-Kishinina Provincial Recreation Area. Part of Milton Goddard's job would have been to scout locations that were potential future provincial parks, and this region would become a provincial recreation area, protected area, in 1979. So you would have to turn south at Sparwood and drive about an hour and a half way into the Rocky Mountains at the very corner intersection of BC, Alberta, and Montana to get here. And it's not exactly Banff National Park in terms of development. It's the one part of extreme southeastern BC they did manage to preserve. Very, as you can see, vast alpine meadows. Moving up the East Kootenay, going up the Rocky Mountain Trench now. Here is perhaps the most famous church in all of the Kootenays, or infamous church in all of the Kootenays. This is the Stolen Church. This is the Anglican church at Windermere that was stolen, if you will, from Donald. Built in 1887 and then taken to Windermere in 1897. It is now a tourist attraction. It's not often that a church gets stolen. Shipped away the flatbed. And then you'll see that marker that the fellow at bottom right is looking at is actually a memorial for a longtime priest. So I encourage you to go online and read more about the Stolen Church. There's just not enough time to go through it tonight. There's Milton Goddard himself, being the subject of the photo instead of the photographer. He is posing next to the Blaeberry River in the Rocky Mountains north of Golden. And you can see how much gravel and silt is carried by the Blaeberry. Lots of wide meanders and braids. This is a great shot. The Trans-Canada Highway was finally completed through Rogers Pass in 1962. And so, shortly thereafter, a monument was built at the top of the summit, and that's the monument that you drive by today, the iconic arches. So here are BC Parks employees touring the brand new monument. Of course, this is a national park monument. It makes total sense. Personnel from one agency visiting the facilities of another agency. But when you drive through the pass, it's so easy to get distracted by the scenery. No matter what time of year it is, the mountains are absolutely stunning. Here is, the monument is gone, or the monument is there, but Glacier Park Lodge is gone, as of a few years ago now. The Longtime Hotel at the top of Rogers Pass, the iconic A-frame, the green green roof. But this and the former convenience store / gas station were torn down a handful of years ago, and all that it's left at the top of Rogers Pass now, besides the monument and the parks facilities, is the Interpretive Center, which is a good way to lose yourself for an hour if you've never made this stop. I highly encourage it. It's a pretty cool place to go spend 45 minutes or an hour learning about the environment around you and the history of Rogers Pass, both natural and cultural. Moving east now into Yoho National Park. This is Wapta Mountain above Emerald Lake, north of the field. I don't know where exactly this is. We know it's in the Kootenai region based on the other slides that were around it when we received them. But this is what Milton Goddard and his co-worker were using as a campsite. Again, you definitely have to be hardy to be a park ranger. That's for sure. You have to be willing to adapt to the harshest conditions, and you better know how to set up a tent. I love this shot. This is another parks ranger with his pack horses on the trail between the Simpson River and Magog Lake in Mount Assiniboine Provincial Park, which is a triangle formed by the boundaries of Kootenai National Park in BC on the west, and Banff National Park in Alberta on the east. And then Mount Assiniboine, which you see at the very left of this photo, is, of course, the namesake of the park. And there are hundreds of kilometers of horse trails and hiking trails in that park. And that's on the bucket list for sure. Here's another national park attraction that is no longer with us. This is the Radium Hot Springs Lodge at Kootenai National Park. This is located across Highway 95 from the actual Radium Hot Springs. And as you can see, you would park in the parking lot and then walk through that tunnel through the mountain to get to the hotel room. But that was torn down quite a while ago now. At least a decade, if not more. That land has now been... I think it's being just returned to nature since it is within Kootenai National Park. But that was Radium Hot Springs Lodge. Here's a BC Forest Service experimental plot. I don't know exactly where this location is. If I had to take a guess, it could be White Swan Lake Provincial Park in the East Kootenay, somewhere around there. Just because, again, that's where this slide was sort of adjacent to photos from the White Swan Lake area. But yeah, an experimental plot for experimental forestry. Speaking of White Swan Lake, here is White Swan Lake, and we are back now to another Hufty Hewitt photo. And Hufty spent many years as a pilot, and that's a Pacific Western Airlines float plane on White Swan Lake. I mentioned before, Hufty took all sorts of photos of the different dams being constructed, and it wasn't just in BC, it's also across the border. This is in Montana, the Libby Dam, which was the one American dam that was constructed as a result of the Columbia River Treaty. And notice Kootenai is spelled with an I, as it is in the United States. Yes, Trevor says he loves all the old cars that we see in these photos. Here's another one on the American side of the border. This is in Washington State. This is the Boundary Dam and Boundary Lake. That's on the Pend Oreille River. And you'll notice the American and the Canadian spelling. The Canadian spelling is in parentheses. So this is just across the border from Nelway. Just west of the highway, or east of the highway, on your way to Spokane. And the Pend Oreille is another river that's dammed multiple times to maximize hydroelectric generation. This is the same river that the 7 Mile Dam and the Juanita Dam are on. There's the Boundary Dam spillway. Spillway shots always look so dramatic, all the mist and spray. So, that was our Kootenai journey. Now let's move a little west. The Thompson, the Okanagan, and the Shuswap give us a lot of great photos. We'll start some sort of the boundary between the Okanagan and the West Kootenai. The intersection of all three would be Mount Moore. And this is a great shot. This is from a set of panoramic photos that were issued to BC Forest Service employees that were stationed at forest lookouts. So this is a set. This is one of 8 photos that give you every cardinal direction as seen from the Mount Moore lookout. In this case, looking towards Big White Mountain. Yes, that Big White, the ski resort nowadays. And that way they could give approximate locations and azimuths for whenever a forest fire was spotted. The days before GPS. This is a view of the waterfront at Okanagan Landing as seen from the SS Kelowna. This is 1926. Okanagan Landing, now part of the city of Vernon. That was the north end of Okanagan Lake. You move further south down Okanagan Lake, midway between Peachland and Summerland. This is the beach at Okanagan Lake Provincial Park, and these are parks personnel inspecting the beach. I appreciate that they're all in suits and ties. This is the town of Vesuvius, back when it was a lot smaller than it is now. And it's in winter to boot. There's no snow on the ground, but it does make the photo look very, like the color's been washed away or something, but it's not. It's just lots of dead grass because it's January. But you get a really cool shot of the different ways in which Vesuvius Lake narrows. You have what is now once again called Vesuvius, formerly Haynes Point Provincial Park. jutting out at the bottom, and then you have the narrowest part of the lake where the Crow's Nest Highway crosses into downtown Osceola. If you were to look at a satellite image of this now, there would be 4 times as many buildings in this photo. That whole west side, south of Osceola, is now fully residential. And, of course, there's quite a amount of development on the east side as well. This is a postcard from the military training camp at Vernon during World War I. This is where the Vernon Cadet Camp is now. But obviously during World War I, this was being used as a training ground for soldiers that were about to head off to fight in Europe. And you can see all the tents in barrack formation. One of our biggest collections of photographs comes to us from the Cadet Club of Nakusp, which operated from the late 50s into the 1980s. And we have hundreds of Cadet photos from when they traveled out of town to different conventions. And one of the big things that Cadets and Kinsmen did when they went out of town for these conventions was they had a Kinsmen convention parade to mark the beginning of the convention. And this is 1964, where the District 5 met in Vernon that year. And the Nakusp contingent dressed as Trojans, complete with a Trojan horse. This is 1968. This is in Kamloops, and this year they went with a clown theme. What's really cool about this is that you can see all the vintage signs on Battle Street in the background. There's still a little bit of neon left, and yeah, just all the different old fonts they used to use, and yeah, it's kind of neat to look at. Here they are lined up for the parade. One thing's for sure, you see a lot more cigarettes in the photos than you do now. Another great photographer, Hans Loo of Burton. Most of the photos in our collection from Hans Loo are indeed from the Arrow Lakes and Valhalla regions, but there are a few out-of-town photos in that collection, including this great shot of the head of Kamloops Lake at Tranquil, looking southeast. And that would be the Tranquil Sanitarium, just right of center. This is the Tranquil River Canyon on that same trip. And also the same trip, Hans Loo would have been joined by his fellow Burtonites, Carl Cray and Walter Isaacs. This is in the Tranquil River Canyon. Great looking topographic shots. Milton Terrence. He's got a few out-of-town photos in his collections for sure. This is from an aerial photo batch taken in 1983. Just a short 2-hour flight, but it's enough in a 2-hour flight from the Nakusp that you can cover a fair bit of ground and get right into the Shuswap and sort of do a loop. This is a great shot of Salmon Arm in 1983. Again, much like Osceola, a lot smaller then than it is now. Salmon Arm is 20,000 people now. And much of this farmland is now residential. And much of Broadview doesn't even exist in this photo. I'm just thinking of how dense that is, especially on the left side and right in the middle of this photograph. That's just all residential nowadays. And this is only 40 years ago. To the West Coast. And of course, we have so many West Coast photos. All the thousands of Arrow Lakes residents who have come from or gone to the Lower Mainland and Vancouver Island over the years. This is a great shot of the Prospect Point lookout, Stanley Park looking towards West Vancouver, and if you notice one thing that's missing, it's the Lionsgate Bridge. There's no Lionsgate Bridge here in this photo. That doesn't get built for another decade or so. You'll also notice no British properties yet, because the Lionsgate Bridge was built to connect the British properties to Vancouver. The British properties don't get built until 1927 or thereabout, is when they start to get developed. But they would be off to the right of this photo. And I believe that was Guinness Brewery money that built the British properties and thus the Lionsgate Bridge. I think that's the right brewery. Speaking of Stanley Park, I can't mention Stanley Park without the hollow tree. And there are so many photos in our collections of people posing in front of the hollow tree, so I just picked the one with the best suits. Sowish Walk, another iconic landmark in Stanley Park. And this is a postcard, October 1927. Of course, it would look a lot different now with the seawall there. This is a photo, and I don't know how this wound up in our collection, but it did. This is a view looking north from the Grosvenor Hotel on Howe Street. This is the corner of Howe and Robson, and you can see the Vancouver Courthouse at center. This is a fantastic shot of the Ueda family. And of course, a couple of slideshows ago, we did a showcase of the Ueda family home movies. But if you go back 25 years before those home movies, here they are as children. Mickey Ueda is not even born yet in this photo. This is 1932. We don't know who the fellow on the left is. But we see Masa, Terry, and Atsu, and then they're Mr. and Mrs. Ueda on at center and at right. This is their home in Queensborough, New Westminster. This building does not exist anymore. Almost none of the original housing stock is left in Queensborough. If you've been there, it's even just within the past 10 years, it's changed so much more development. But and of course, they would lose this home when they were interned and forced to move to the West Kootenay during World War II. Did you know that there is a SkyTrain car called the Spirit of Nakusp? Yes, and here's the dedication photo to prove it. Stan Fellows, mayor of Nakusp at times, standing at center with a picture of the train. The photo is actually taken inside the Hyatt Regency downtown. Future Premier Rita Johnston is standing there at center with him, and pretty much every town in BC that was incorporated got some kind of SkyTrain car named after them. But it is neat that it's probably still in operation today. The Spirit of Nakusp is flying around the tracks somewhere on the Expo line in Vancouver. Back to some more Milton Goddard photos. This is the view from Mount Seymour in North Vancouver. We're looking toward Deep Cove, bottom right, Dollarton at center right, and then Burnaby Mountain is across the way there. Belcara is tucked in at left, the village of Belcara. Moving further north, there's Garibaldi, Mount Garibaldi, the table in Garibaldi Provincial Park, and you can see why it's called the table. It's just completely leveled off. A very unique formation. So it's only fitting that it gets a very unique name. Also within Garibaldi Provincial Park, I think there was a bit of snow this year, as you can probably tell by this photo, because the directional sign is almost completely covered. Well, at least you know how far it is to the ranger cabin. Another provincial park in the Sea to Sky country, Brandywine Falls Provincial Park, north of Garibaldi, just off Highway 99. Going over into the Fraser Canyon, we see shots of the Canadian Pacific and the Canadian National along the Fraser River on opposite sides, and you can see why it's so hard to get Highway 1 through there, because the most obvious paths through the canyon were already taken up by the two railways. And so the highways are built in even more precipitous locations. And of course, Jackass Mountain was the scene of pretty severe washouts during the disastrous flood season that we had this past fall. Oh yeah, and if you're wondering why it's called Jackass Mountain, because a donkey fell off the cliff back in the gold rush days. More BC Parks personnel, this time posing at the BC Parks headquarters in Manning Park in 1964. I mentioned a few more cigarettes, but the fellow in front's holding a pipe. Could you imagine that nowadays? A little bit of morbidity for you. This is the Hope Slide. This is just probably a few days after the slide happened. You can see the fresh slide path at right. There's been a little bit of snowfall since, and then you can see the road leading into the slide. The slide, of course, swallowed much of the Crow's Nest Highway there. Completely filled in an entire lake, and sadly killed some travelers as well. And the scar is still quite visible. There is a Hope Slide rest area that you can visit to this day. Speaking of hope, here's the famed Igloo skating rink. Just a neat little shot. Moving on to Vancouver Island, and this comes out of the John Sanderson photo album that was found in the New Denver landfill. And I'm very fortunate that it was rescued. This is a great shot of the Parliament buildings in Victoria in the early 1900s. Looking very majestic. The Point Ellis Bridge on Bay Street in Victoria Harbour. And it shows you how much the harbour narrows at some point. This is a great shot of the Queen of Burnaby sailing through the Gulf Islands. That looks like a very mid-century ferry, doesn't it? Modern enough to be modern, but not too modern. Especially pastel blue. This is a gorgeous shot. It'd be even more gorgeous if it weren't for the logging in front of it. This is looking towards Barkley Sound and the Broken Group Islands. And about a decade after this photo was taken, those would all be included within Pacific Rim National Park Reserve. Which is probably why Milton Goddard is here taking this photo. To the prairies. As we head into the final third of our slideshow tonight. There are those BC Parks personnel at it again. This time on a trip through Banff National Park. You can even see the Grey Line sightseeing bus that they're riding in. There's Castle Mountain way off in the distance, so it kind of gives away where they are. And you can see how Castle Mountain gets its name. Here are skiers touring above Lake Louise. This is a Milton Goddard shot, but these are just vacation photos. He's not working here. There's lots of skiing photos in the collection. But a great shot of the hillside above Lake Louise. We are not sure, but it's a decent guess that is probably John Nelson of Galena Bay in this shot in front of Dinny the Dinosaur at the Calgary Zoo sometime in the 1950s and 1960s. As that is... and it very well could be Henry Nelson at the left. Also of Galena Bay. It's not too often at a historical society you get a... especially one in the Arrow Lakes, that you get a photo of a giant dinosaur statue. This comes from the Redpath family albums. This is Rosedale, Alberta in the 1950s. Today, Rosedale is part of the town of Drumheller, and this is where the Redpath and Taylor families wound up in the mid-20th century. You just see the Badlands all around in the background. And of course, coal. This is hardcore coal country. And that's what Drumheller was built on. And that's ultimately why they found so many fossils. Because, of course, where does coal come from? Deceased or decayed organic matter. Plants and animals from hundreds of millions of years ago. A shot of the town site of Rosedale off to the left of the coal mine. And you can see how much the Red Deer River Valley has eroded from the original land level. And that's what creates these badland formations as the land around it gets pushed up and the river erodes down. More badland landscape in the Red Deer River. This time at Dinosaur Provincial Park, which is north of Brooks. And this is another Milton Goddard photo. Speaking of Dinosaur Provincial Park, how's that for a vintage interpretive panel? 1966. To actually take the time to illustrate an interpretive panel. Moving east into Saskatchewan. This is the Gardner Dam, one of two dams that impounds the gargantuan Lake Diefenbaker Reservoir, which lies at the confluence of the South Saskatchewan and Red Deer Rivers. And being the prairies and being very flat, the dams have to be huge and wide to impound the amount of water required. And there are the turbines at Gardner Dam under construction at Cut Bank, Saskatchewan. This is a cool shot. If that caption didn't say Lake Winnipeg, Manitoba, you could just as well think that's somewhere on the Pacific coast of Oregon. Manitoba, being a prairie province, gets a rap for not having much to see. That's completely unfair because I think most people only ever see it buzzing through on the Trans-Canada Highway. That's extreme south Manitoba. Most of Manitoba is covered in lakes, and some of them are some of the largest lakes on the continent. In Lake Winnipeg's case, one of the largest lakes in the world, and the wave action on Lake Winnipeg is massive, but it also means that it's more warmer end. You have these amazing beaches, cottage country for Winnipeggers. Grand Beach, Victoria Beach, really beautiful locations. And now we go away and abroad. And of course, war, sadly, always seems a bit too close to us in the news. And in the days before widespread personal cameras and motion picture photography and video. One of the ways to get out conditions on, to demonstrate conditions on the front lines were postcards, official sent postcards that people could purchase and send to their loved ones to show conditions on the front line. This is a British official photograph of a soldier sitting in a trench bunker. This is probably at the Battle of the Somme, since the other photos in this set are from the Battle of the Somme in France in World War One. Some of these are pretty bleak. I will warn you ahead of time. Yeah, when they say the trenches, they mean the trenches. This was a modern war fought with 19th century methods, but modern equipment, and which is why the casualty totals are so heavy. Yeah, here's a destroyed trench and bunker in the Battle of the Somme, and you notice there's no vegetation anywhere. The whole landscape is just completely denuded. As I say, I warn you, some of these shots are pretty bleak. That one speaks for itself. So does this. The ruins of the village of Sushi in the Pas-de-Calais department of France. Yeah. Getting into some family photos now. This is the old family. And you say, Kyle, of course it's old. It's the 1880s. But no, Harry Old and George Old were the first people to permanently settle in the Innoquin Valley that were non-native. They came in 1891 or thereabouts, and their descendants live on to this day through a whole bunch of different surnames, Flick, Belinsky, and the like, Watson, all throughout the Earl Lakes Valley. They came from Cornwall, and that's their father in the center, and check out those mutton chops. Another family that was here early on in the cusp settlement, not quite as early as the Olds, but in the 1900s, were the Mcmurders. They came in 1908. This is Robert Mcmurder, the head of the family, as you can see by the arrow that's been drawn on this photo, posing with his family. And of course, it's Scotland, so sheep. I just love how there's one solitary sheep just standing in the middle. This is an interesting shot. Buckingham Palace. This is before 1913. We know it's before 1913 because that was the year that Ernest and Letitia Bill came to Glenbank. Ernest Bill was the head of staff at Buckingham Palace. There's lots of speculation and hyperbole about the reasons that the Bills left their positions at Buckingham Palace to come to Shakespeare Road in the cusp. But that's another one you can Google. More upper classery here. That's Horus Waterfield. And yes, he of the Waterfield family of Crescent Bay. Horus Waterfield was the secretary for the Lieutenant Governor of New Zealand. And that little girl, holding herself up on the back of her father's chair, is Jean Waterfield, who you may know better as Jean Spicer. She was born in Wellington, New Zealand in 1909, and it was just a few years after that the Waterfield settled in Crescent Bay. More royal connections, this time from the Russian royal family. the Denisenkos and Frolofs of Galena Bay, after a dispute back in Russia, went into self-exile, if you would, in England, and lived there for almost a decade before coming to Galena Bay at the beginning of the 1910s. This photo would be taken either in Crimea or in England. But yes, in fact, Mr. Froloff, I believe, was Count Stephen Froloff. Speaking of Galena Bay, much more modest origins, John Nelson. He came to Galena Bay in 1901. Originally from Barrow-in-Furness, Lancashire, now Merseyside, or Cumberland, now. Kind of got swapped between the regions for legal purposes, but there are a few families in the cusp that can trace their origins to the town of Barrow-in-Furness, including the Barrow family, naturally. But John Nelson, looking very dapper with his bicycle here at late 1890s or 1900. Les Miller, longtime insurance agent in the cusp and real estate agent during the middle of the 20th century. This was his family's grocery store in Eastbourne, East Sussex. Another name associated with Browse is Wensley, as in Wensley Creek, the cross-country ski trails, and those are named for Fred Wensley. And his family owned a chain of hay and corn storage units, so where they would sell different grains and foodstuffs, horse feed, animal feed. This is Wensley. This is one of Wensley's hay and corn stores in the late 19th century. A family that came to the cusp in the 1910s were, I'm sure it's probably pronounced Gröge, but Grage was how I always told it. Was always told to me, I should say. And they left Germany and initially attempted to settle in Brazil. Southern Brazil, you may not know, actually has a fairly large German population. And these were settlers that came at the end of the 19th century and early 20th century to establish farming colonies. And this is one of those farming colonies in the Sao Paulo state. And Herbert Grave was actually born in Brazil, specifically in this hut. And you can see the caption in German that says Herbert Grave was born in this jungle hut on 10 December 1904. And as a young child came to the cusp. Definitely a different landscape than the cusp, that's for sure. So that's your Brazil and the cusp collection. I like this. This is the UBC senior rowing team preparing to place their boat in the Willamette River at a rowing meet in Corvallis, Oregon. The coxswain for the rowing team at UBC was Milt Parent, my predecessor here at the Historical Society, and that's him standing off to the left, just at center there, of the rest of the team, and there he is being thrown into the river. I enjoy the action shot. This just randomly wound up in Milton Goddard's slide collection. It's not one of his slides. This is a commercial slide of the Unisphere at the 1964 New York World's Fair. This is where the U.S. Open tennis tournament is played every year in Flushing Meadows. Yeah, it's just funny that this commercially sold slide wound up in that collection. But you never know what you're going to get in this job. Finally, we'll head up north As we make our way north, once you leave the Thompson, you enter the Caribou, and if you turn left at the Caribou, you enter the Chilcotin. You make your way out towards Tweedsmuir Park. This is Anaheim Peak, Anaheim Lake area there. Anaheim Peak is very much off by its own, amidst the western edge of the Chilcotin Plateau. You make your way into Tweedsmuir Provincial Park, and you get to Turner Lake. And this is Hunland Falls, the north end of Turner Lake. Sort of in the foothills of the Coast Mountains at that point. Carrying on back to the Caribou, going up the Fraser River, you come across Diamond Island at Alexandria. And if you don't know what Alexandria is, that was a fort founded by Alexander Mackenzie, or named after Alexander Mackenzie. And there's a little monument there right next to a roadside diner that's still there today, north end of Alexandria. Of course, you can't talk about the Caribou without talking about Barkerville. And there is Barkerville Historic Town, which would have been 3 years old in 1961. The provincial government took over the town site in 1958. Naturally, they make their way into a BC Parks slide collection. And there's the original Billy Barker mineshaft display. That's some impressive statue work, actually. This is from the Hufty Hewitt slide collection. This is the then 3-year-old town site of Mackenzie. And as you can see, it's just getting going here. It's only about half the size here that it is now in terms of being built out. And, that's Highway 39 running straight through the middle. That would now be right dead center, middle of town, Mackenzie Boulevard. So this is right at the beginning of Mackenzie. Mackenzie's most famous tourist attraction is this, the Laterno G175 Tree Crusher. And this is, now it's just a roadside attraction, the world's largest tree crusher, but this here is the tree crusher back in the days when it was actually in action. Why a tree crusher, you ask? Well, Williston Lake is a massive reservoir that was created by the damming of the Peace River. It's so massive that there was just no feasible way to log it in time for the creation of the reservoir. So a lot of those trees were simply crushed. Speaking of large masses of trees, this is what happens when you don't log a 400-kilometer long reservoir. That's a spectacular amount of dead trees and brush. Disturbingly large amount. And there's what was left when Williston Lake was fully formed. It's a massive, massive lake. Large enough that it actually directly affects the climate around it. And you can see at the bottom especially just how much forest is flooded. The main center of activity for the construction of the Bennett Dam was the town site of Hudson's Hope. In fact, the Bennett Dam is within the corporate limits of Hudson's Hope, even though it's about 25 kilometers away from the town center. And there is the town center of Hudson's Hope. Also taken on this same trip, the same day, this great aerial shot of Fort St. John, when it is about a third of the size of that it is now. Still fairly substantial here, but definitely not the 20,000 people plus that it is now. And then, as you can guess, the Alaska Highway off it, right? And then the Peace River off at top right. That would be around the site of Old Fort, where they had so many problems with landslides the past couple of years, sinking ground. This was actually taken at the Western Development Museum in Saskatoon by Milton Goddard. but it's more of a northwestern BC, southern Yukon artifact, because that is a stagecoach from the White Pass and Yukon Railway on display. Western Development Museum is still there, of course. You can go visit. And then finally we have Jack Bedford, formerly of the Cusp, posing next to a truck that was extracted from the Desidece River near the Alaska Highway in Yukon, 1952. As you can see, this truck had borderline catastrophic damage. I suppose it's still drivable, though I don't know why you'd want to at that point. But yeah, the Alaska Highway, in the beginning days of the Alaska Highway, much more treacherous than it is now. So we end our slide with Delaparent of Nakusp, the late Delaparent, seated on a cruise ship with a glacier in the background. The Inside Passage, Glacier Bay National Park, Alaska, June 1980. What a great... that's a pretty cool vacation shot to have in your collection. So that's it. That's all I've got tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Again, you don't get to see my lovely face, but you do get to hear my dulcet tones. I hope you enjoyed it. I want to let you know that we, of course, have one more slideshow to go this year, and that is April 15th, back here at 7 o'clock p.m. Pacific, and that is the long-awaited follow-up to the original Ichiro Shino movie night that we did last season. I have edited together the best of the second half of his movies, along with a few still shots thrown in. And I hope you join me for that. And I would also make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube page if you have a Google account, YouTube account. And if you're not, just keep an eye out on this YouTube channel anyway, because we're going to have lots of fun little videos being uploaded over the next few months. Even once the slideshows end, the videos will continue. I've digitized 29 different little pieces of camcorder footage taken around the Arrow Lakes from around the late 80s and early 90s. And I won't spoil it too much. I'll let the films speak for themselves. Just community events and little tours and things like that. Stuff that might not be great for a slideshow, but as far as just cool archival footage to watch on YouTube from the recent past, I think you'll get a kick out of. So that's it for me, and join us back here again April 15th, and like I said, keep an eye out on this YouTube channel for some more goodies in the upcoming weeks and months. Have a good one, everybody, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.